So welcome to Simply Sacred, a loving gaze at the inner world in a modern society. We are here with myself, Auroara Leigh, Kaja Gjesdal, and Dr. Drew from Peru.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With Simply Sacred, we like to look at all things of the inner world, and I think that resilience is a big aspect that comes up for people. Sometimes we talk about the problems, the traumas, the healing modalities, but really, what is resilience? And I think that between all three of us, we'll have different perspectives, yet they'll all come together in the same way, because at the end of the day, resilience is that state of being that we all so strive to have, because resilience, it means that we're able to face what is in life. And there's times, I think, for myself that where I haven't been able to because of different reasons. And then there's times where I've been overly resilient in a way. And so I think that it'd be really neat to talk and dive into what resilience really is and why we want to get there, why we want to have resilience, what key factors can we even strive to have in our communities, in our small organizations, in our families, whatever kind of group dynamic we have, because I think that if we really care about communities being healthy, we'll realize that it's the small things that can matter for those who are the most vulnerable, those who maybe don't have pillars of strength and support, to realize that we can be key factors for them, for their well-being, that maybe we don't consider from our own place of privilege or our own place of strength, because we've already had that. And I think that I see that in the small community that I'm in, when people turn away from another person or they chastise another person, what if that is a huge pillar that's now taken from them, and now they go down a really hard path because maybe they don't have other pillars. And so I do see that where there's a responsibility to be a positive force for those who maybe have more vulnerabilities than others. And that's why I'm passionate about this topic. Dr. Drew, what does resilience mean to you?
You started from the beginning in a very lofty manner. You did say the resilience is the state of being, is the state of beingness, the state of oneself, and it is the state of life itself. Resilience is the ability to endure whatever lives we might have. Resilience is being able to kick off and remove whatever it is on our path in order to grow and evolve into more resilient, sentient being. Because we live on this planet and we don't think that we are just another being on this planet. We consider this planet our own, but we know nothing about it really. And the resilience we have within is also the resilience of the planet. It goes further, it goes deeper. And also people do not understand that they say, you are the physical aspect of yourself, you are the energetic aspect of yourself, you are the mental, emotional aspect of yourself, and you are the spiritual aspect of yourself. All these different aspects of yourself is you. But what people do not realize is that body is in you, energy is in you, mental, emotional state is in you, brain is in you, mind is in you, soul is in you, consciousness in you. All of it is just one, is never separated. So resilience is the ability, this innate ability, enabled to back off whatever stands in one's way, so one can grow and evolve into more spiritual, sentient being. One can understand that living on this planet, not just that we are not living alone, ourselves in our very existence, we are not living alone. But we pretend we do. We think that our resilience will withstand everything and all. And it can only do so if one connects with the true divine forces within, and one connects with the divine of the universe, or whatever it is behind it. So one believes that what one breathes, that what one thinks and feels, that emotion one has, that is in itself resilience, because it's a one's worldview. And that needs to be constantly cultivated and cultured, because it is a lifelong journey. It's not something you can learn reading a book or having a degree. Is much more than that. Physical resilience is different. Energetic resilience is different. Mental, emotional resilience is different. Spiritual resilience is different. But somehow they all come together. And most of it, we are not even aware. It's somewhere in our subconscious or our unconscious. And then when we're in a non-ordinary states of consciousness, it is in our subconscious, but we are not really feeling it. Imagine an animal living in the jungle, like here in the upper Amazon, and is not aware of itself.
I think there's a gratitude. I feel like so much of it comes down to the practice constantly of being grateful, aware of what to be grateful for every day. I think that's such a simple theory, but the practice of that is key piece of, I think, resilience, is being aware of that, what we can always be grateful for, no matter what is happening in our life, no matter what has happened, that every morning we can wake up and find something and repeat that every day, all day.
That is called cultivating and culturing that resilience, the very life spark, the very spirit spark within. Cultivating and culturing it, one of the possible ways is showing gratitude in every word and deed. But there is much more. Also, being responsible. Resilience is something which is one creates, is not something which happens on its own. Resilience is what one creates with one's very life. One's very life is a kind of reflection of one's resilience. So that is why it is important to eat healthy foods. How can one be resilient if one doesn't have a awesome, healthy, nourishing, nurturing food and drink every day? How can one possibly have a physical resilience? And then later energetic, mental, emotional, because we don't really take seriously where we are. Whenever I've been talking to another psychiatrist, I always say, we do know we have a relative conscious, we do know we have a subconscious and unconscious, and we have a superconscious. And then you come close to the aspect, you look at the aspect, you see it a little bit deeper, and then you can say that's the subconscious. But much, much deeper there is the unconscious you cannot see, is there in the dark, in the very depth of your being. But then you need to think about. So the resilience has all to do with it, because one needs to learn how to live in a harmony with all these cosmic and earthly forces and forces from within. How does one maneuver, navigate life? It's like a entheogenic, so-called psychedelic journey. One needs to navigate non-ordinary states of consciousness, and one is not in a state of super consciousness when one is not high, as it were. One is in a state of ordinary consciousness, and as well in the state of ordinary consciousness, one needs to navigate navigate life. So the resilience, the physical, energetic, mental, spiritual, is of utmost importance. But how can resilience be there if one is not real, if one is not authentic?
When I was in Peru, I was at the biochar rejuvenation center, and one of the Quechuan men was teaching us about how the mud, the soil, the highly nutritious soil would be planted at the time of planting a plant so that it would have the very best start. And that would be obviously impacting the resilience of that plant. Now, the video I shared with both of you, the reason I like that video, and I will post it when I post this, a link to it, is because it was in a neuroscientific course on the fundamental aspect that is the same as that ideology with the plant, that they would have the best start with the most support in the beginning. Now, we know that in brain science, we know that adoption or deep trauma that is toxic stress, without that maternal love, without that love that child needs, there's a very limited amount of resilience that a person has later on in life that leads to negative health outcomes. One of my curiosities, and I greatly adore your wisdom, Dr. Drew, as you are a breadth of knowledge, of integrative knowledge, being a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, and the spiritual plant medicine wisdom that you hold true and know, and you bring that all together, which I think Canada has yet to see in the way that you offer it to your patients in Peru. And I'm curious, like, when a person has that kind of start in their life, where maybe they have that abandonment, they don't have maternal love, they also have toxic stress due to different kinds of abuses or violence or neglect, and then they don't have the maternal love to buffer that toxic stress. The neuroscientists have actually found that there's a key enzyme that can be created that buffers the toxic stress when there's love, but particularly maternal love for that child. But how later on in life can adults heal something like that?
Thank you. Yes, you are damn right. Excuse my French. Firstly, not everybody starts the same. Why? Because not each and every two-legged being called human is the same. Everybody is different. And my granddad used to say, forget about things you disagree with somebody. Focus on those things you agree with. Celebrate that difference. But when it comes to resilience, since not each and every two-legged one human being is the same, depending on race, which is not really biological scientific term, is more a social construct, but it has such a weight in one's life. Then ethnicity, education, life experiences, social class, social status, religion, spiritual belongings, all of it equally influence one's being. Thus, if somebody lives in a very cold, reserved, uncaring environment, of course, that itself will create a damage or trauma of different types. And if, of course, there are lots of things we still do not really understand about human body, about human energy, about human mental, emotional states, about human soul, about human spirit. We don't really understand it. And this is where the plants and the mushrooms and the lichens and possibly other products of nature, because the nature is the perfect pharmacist, the perfect chemist, There is no way that any human can create better food, materials to build, or medicines than the nature. That's why it's extremely important to understand that, of course, there'll be certain enzymes which can create it by a mother, or also in a father, because lots of people think when mother is pregnant, the pregnancy is only with mother and is never pregnancy with father. I have to tell you, I have two boys, Bella and now. They're the scallywags, and they are definitely affecting me too. Her pregnancy was also my pregnancy. So that things like that should be taken into consideration. So that's why there are lots of things we still don't understand. Is it oxytocin? Is it dopamine? Is noradrenaline, adrenaline? What is it? Which kind of neurotransmitter is making these enzymes to come out and buffer against certain traumas? But we all been traumatized since birth in one way or another, and people don't really want to understand that and accept that reality. So since we all be traumatized, we have a different resilience to life, different resilience to our jobs, to our vocations, different resilience to our exercises, different resilience to our mental, emotional states, our spiritual endeavors. All of that is different. But everything changes when one becomes aware of it and one starts studying it, researching it, investigating it, starting playing an active role in one's life, watching all these Netflix movies when actually one is one's own movie. Oneself is one's own movie. Oneself is one's own myth. Oneself is one's own legend. It's all the same. But people don't realize. They just look at the Netflix movie or telly, whatever, and then it's much more interesting than one's own life. How can it possibly be? And it's much more interesting than this planet. How can it possibly be? And all forms of life of this planet. It's a sheer scientific, physical, energetic, mental, emotional, spiritual, incredible thing called life. This is an incredible thing. And people are not aware of it. They don't live life. They live in their heads. They live in the numbers, in the businesses, the things they want. They don't live life. They have no contact with life. And this is where we have this incredible opportunity, possibility to work with the plants, mushrooms, and lichens, and other natural products on different levels, as a food, as a medicine, as an entheogen, as a tonic, as a calming, antidepressant, antipsychotics. There are lots of antipsychotics here in the Amazon. I'm using some of them, treating some psychotic patients. What I'm trying to say, the resilience is actually a knowledge, a wisdom about life.
Can we say then too, I feel like learning more about resilience is obviously very connected to our disconnect from understanding nature, right? The more we understand how resilient Mother Earth is and nature itself, Mother Nature, more studying of that as you do, we understand the resilience that we are also of that connection. And that the importance of, I understand as well, the importance of many of us taking entheogens in that way, in nature, to understand that connectedness and our ability of resilience and our connectedness to love. And yeah.
But it's also one thing very important to understand is not everybody, each and every being is able to have resilience.
Because most people
that's what, not like the same. Each and every being cannot have a lot of cash. Each and every being cannot look very young. Each and every being cannot be very thin. Each and every being cannot be very fat. Each and every being cannot be very bad. It's the same thing. This is what is important to understand. But that's why we have a science, the modern conventional orthodox science, which we merge together with the different traditions, other medical traditions or spiritual traditions and certain religious teachings, and integrate all this knowledge so one can learn, one can cultivate and culture this resilience, which is, it would be then a conscious act. And one actively participates in it. Because one can't possibly have resilience if one has rather immature, juvenile, or distorted, or unrealistic, ignorant, or arrogant, whatever, bluntly idiotic ideas. And of course, if one is born, one has been marginalized since the beginning in case of indigenous people on all continents, and you are treated as a second-grade citizen, or there is a genocide upon them. So of course, that will break the resilience and makes great difficulty for one to be resilient. But listen, what I want to say here, which needs to be also understood, that all races and ethnicity of people on this planet have been through a trauma. White men, so-called Western men, which is actually most of the white men genetically don't originate from Western world. They originate from Central Asia, which starts with Asia Minor, with Turkey. But even the white people who had their own indigenous understanding of life, a cosmovision, a worldview, like the Celts, or like the Romans, or like the Greeks, or like the Germanic tribes with the Wotan, and the Vikings with the Odin and Thor. These were all indigenous people who lived indigenous lives, and they lived in harmony with nature big time. And imagine the Christianity came and slaughtered them.
Yeah.
The 1,500 years before the Christians came to Americas, they came there and did the same. They violated the people's rights. They tortured them. They burned them at stakes. They hanged them. They murdered them. Children, small children.
So much trauma in every ancestral lineage.
Of course.
Everyone's ancestors are rooted back to those who lived with the land that were indigenous. Though at some point there was a pain story that came in, and then that pain spreads, and it's a choice to continue spreading that pain of disconnection and abuse to one another or not. It's like a cancer cell that metastasizes. And I think that anyone can choose to do intergenerational trauma healing, and it will benefit the collective. It'll benefit all of our future descendants that are coming. In terms of resilience, we also have ancestors in our epigenetic DNA that can activate where our ancestors were also resilient. I watched it during COVID. There were people with ancestors that would make things like sauerkraut, and all of a sudden everyone's making sauerkraut because of the global uncertainty. That's epigenetic resilience, to activate a knowing around nurturing one's family, ensuring that their people can survive. That's a resilience factor. And so I think that it's really promising, and I hope that is a hopeful for others to know that resilience is also in each and every person.
Definitely it is, but it's in each and every person, it is different. But at the same time, as I said earlier, Once one becomes aware of it, conscious of it, and start consciously, actively participate in bettering one's physical body, energetic body, mental, emotional state, feeding one's soul, brightening the spirit, living life in gratitude, as you said, but in honesty and integrity and gratitude. Most of the people, that's where the indigenous people come into the picture before the Christianity came, and all over the world. And they had this contact, a relation, connection, relation with the nature. And it was the nature which was constantly inspiring them to reactivate the divine sparkle of resilience within, or being alive and being in a full strength and full power, abundant and radiating love and light and beauty and empathy and compassion and understanding, and having knowledge and wisdom about the trees. My ancestors had the knowledge of wisdom, talking to the trees, talking to the birds, talking to the animals. And so that's the resilience. On a personal level is the one thing, collective level is another one. And on the species level, humankind, when somebody said humankind, I think, what do you really mean by humankind?
Kaja is all about making love to the world. Kaja, do you want to chime in about love?
Yeah, please. Yeah, that's what I'm always coming back to. I think, I know for myself, the coming back to always the seeking of love for yourself and for others, and never giving up on embodying love and finding it, like Drew, like in a tree, like hugging a tree that the other day and being like, do you feel my love? And I feel your love. I think that again is, I think, what the key ingredient is in us being resilient and having resilience, is that connection to true pure love, which of course is mostly in nature, especially with humans. I think most of us don't really even understand true love. And as we say, many of us that have been born into families that didn't have that maternal love, of course, we have a greater challenge in seeking this and understanding what love is. But I think that's what we're all here for, is the learning of love, so that we grow more resilient. And the more that we are exposed to that, and the more that we have communities that are built on love and looking out for someone that does need help, that isn't showing as much resilience, that you give that ingredient of love, and then they feel they can keep going on, then they automatically have something to be grateful for. That person loves me. That person has shown me love. Right? Love exists. I can keep going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally agree. I totally agree with you, but there is one thing to be understood, as always. Of course, love one feels for oneself, for dear and close ones, for others, for the world, for the all forms of life. It's definitely a greatest resilience of all. But to be able to feel that love at the same time, one needs to feel the pain as well. One needs to feel the pain, the suffering, because resilience is like, oh, I feel all the pain, the suffering, and not ease kind of state. And because I know that one day I will not be able to continue with in the same form I am now. So I have to learn how to be resilient to life as well, in order to be free of it.
I think in terms
Because
of
lots of people, when I was a child, my granddad used to say, you see, all those books, you have to read them. Wow. I said, why? And he said, because then you can be free of them. Because those books are stepping stones. So resilience is a stepping stone too. You always are increasing it or decreasing it. It's never constant. Sometimes it surprises you because you're resilient to something, and some other time you find yourself in shackles of your own mind, in shackles of your own mind.
I think the
So, you know,
narrative,
it's a being resilient. Being resilient is the greatest art to be mastered. It is the greatest art to be lived, to be danced, to be lived.
I think
To
the
be.
inner narrative is really important. That's why the podcast is all on the loving gaze at the inner world. And I think that when sometimes for people who are in the slumps, they have not conquered their trauma, they don't feel on top of their trauma. They're still amidst the muck, right? The mud that the lotus flower then comes to come out of. They're still in that space. And the power of restoring one's story, one's narrative, one's inner narrative is so profound and important. And I think about, there was a research study that was done on maids, and they found that all of these maids, they were working 12-hour days. They had over 10,000 steps, but they were all obese. And so the researchers went in and they were talking about that they were just doing something for regulatory checks. So they were doing interviewing. But the actual component of the research was that the researcher shared with them, wow, that's incredible. You were doing all these healthy activities. And that was the whole point, was to restory what they were doing rather than the grunt work of the work that they were doing, which then was holding a different story and pain in their body. And so when the maids had that experience of seeing it shaped that way or seen that way, the researchers ended up coming back and they were having profoundly different health outcomes, but doing the same activities of vacuuming and all of the things that are exercise. But now, because it was languaged and internalized differently, the body was responding differently. There is so much to say about the mental story we tell ourselves about what we're doing.
Definitely, there is no doubt about the words you spoken. They're true, because lots of people don't really realize, they're not really aware they're alive. They are not each and every day. They're disconnected, disassociated from themselves and from life itself. So lack of resilience is being dissociated and dysfunctional with oneself and the life one is living. And of course, there is no yet an paradigm or model which I am working very hard to create here in the Upper Amazon, where that model incorporates the whole being. Does everybody who comes to us, we kindly ask to provide us with life history in detail, medical history, and then we do medical, psychological, psychiatric evaluation in order to have a report. And that report, we dialogue with the patient, and then we start the journey. It's also a journey of resilience. Resilience, but not just the force within. One has to tackle any obstacle or obstacle of all sorts. It's
People have
not just
precursors that set them back. Some people have cards in their hand for the rest of their life that they can't change. So their resilience can only ever be at a certain level because of that deficit that they have or that they started out with. But they can, but with understanding what one's cards are that they can't change, then they can look at the ones where they can. And that's where you're talking about the food. That's where you're talking about being around positive and uplifting people, being in spaces where there's social mechanisms that are actually psychologically safe. They're for people's well-being. There are other factors as well, right? And so I wonder if we could give a listener that's living their everyday life and maybe they don't really think about these things as much as we do. What kind of like tasks at hand could they think about in order to increase their resilience? Could we give a few tidbits on that? What do you think?
I think it's extremely important for each and every one being, two-legged being or human on this planet, to really understand one's state of health. not just going now and then to the doctor's surgery or office and doing a general checkup and then finding that everything is fine or finding something is not fine. And then it is about being aware of what kind of life or into what person one has turned oneself into. What has one become due to various factors, and then thinking about exercises. Physical movement is so important of all sorts. They can be pilates, they can be gymnastics, they can be jogging, they can be swimming, they can be martial arts, they can be yoga, they can be breathing exercises. And then with it, you need to have massage, bone setting, chiropractic or osteopathy, the plants, the hot stones, saunas. You need to have that. You need to treat the physical being and then treat the energetic being, because the physical being is going to give you an ability to endure the impact, whatever it is coming in life, whatever difficulty or challenges one might come across. That physical endurance, a stamina, a bold stamina will be able to back off any difficulties or challenges. And then this energetic thing of being in a place of the right vibe and energy, and being with a positive, progressive, empathic, compassionate, sentient beings, being in that vibe, and also oneself creating a vibe, because oneself creates a vibe too of some sorts. And that vibe also has to do with the resilience. And then mental emotional state. So mental emotional state, paying really attention, studying, investigating, researching oneself, becoming aware of one's actions and reactions. So that's why the food is very important. Organic, biodynamic food, nutritious food. That's for the stamina, physical stamina, energetic stamina too, but also for mental, emotional resilience too. And then quality of sleep, having a really deep sleep. Lots of people nowadays don't sleep well, and they can't sleep deep, and they wake up too many times. They urinate a lot, because when one urinates a lot, one loses the vitamins and minerals and microelements in that urination. It also affects the resilience. And then mental emotional state, also very important.
Somebody's doing a tedious task, and say they're doing that task, maybe it's part of their job and they're doing it hours at a time. How they think about that task while they're doing it can impact their physical health later.
Of course it can, because
they're turning that into, say, something like arthritis. Of course, inflammation is going to occur if you have inflamed thoughts and emotions regarding something, right? And it'll become into the physical form. And then we just call it genetics, in Western science. But the thing is, it's not we know the research, we know that it's true, the spiritual knowledge keepers as well. We know that it's true that our state of being, our mind and our spirituality and our emotional selves impacts our physical well-being, but we're not implementing that in all ways in society where it can actually benefit the whole. And I think that we could do a lot more in that regard.
Can I say though,
yeah,
that a big part of this is because, yes, there has been so much suffering. We've all accumulated a certain amount of generational traumas and this suffering that it's so important that we have this rewiring of pleasure. What healthy pleasures, right? Healthy pleasures. And that's a huge thing with food, as we know too, that we're so addicted to sugar that gives us instant pleasure, but that's going to hurt our body, right? So there's like that big rewiring, of course, of what healthy pleasures there are, but it's so important that through resilience, that we do find these little pieces that that do give us pleasure to be able to build this resilience to continue on this life path. And I think when you say to the cleaning, in my own personal experience, okay, and as someone that uses entheogens, I just want to say that I had this rewiring of like when I was cleaning at a motel in this small town, being like, oh my God, like this kind of job, like this is depressing. And when I had cannabis, a little bit of cannabis before, and rewired my brain thinking, you know what, I'm going to sing. I'm going to sing mantras for 4 hours and do meditation. It became like a job where I was like, this is great. I just get to like clean and meditate and sing for 4 hours and someone pays me that. Like that was a huge rewiring for me, and like a mundane job that like my mom even recently was like, you don't work, you haven't worked. And I'm like, yeah, I was cleaning at the motel for the Korean family. That's not work. I'm like, whoa, that's her
They
programming.
restoried it. I think that'll resonate for a lot of listeners, that they do have the mundane jobs, but mundane jobs are sacred.
Of
Yes.
course,
They are
And the
so
benefit,
sacred.
everything is sacred.
yeah,
Everything and all is sacred. Mundane job is sacred, of
yeah,
course, because Monday job, in one way or another, enables one to build the resilience to in order to live life. Monday
yeah,
job gives one's resilience in one way or another, learns one, teaches one
You show your mom
how to
this
build up
episode.
the resilience. And then you decide, okay, what sort of job do you want to have? Is that the job you really benefits you and really benefits others, including all form of life, if possible? And that very resilience is in effect a form of love, really. Is a form of
yeah,
love
yeah,
towards life, towards everything you do.
Yeah.
yeah,
That's that resilience. Not I have 8 to 5 day job and I'm pissed off and frustrated and angry and fed up and I can't take it anymore. The life has no meaning. Wait a second. It's not the life has no meaning. Is that one doesn't give meaning and purpose to life.
yeah,
Yes.
So it is
Restore
not
that.
about the resilience. It's not about resilience per se. It's what one and how one does it, what
yes.
one does about it,
Find
what
the,
one does with it, whatever it is, because that resilience is very life. Because we know one day we're all gonna pop the clocks, we're all gonna get older, and we're all gonna get sick, and we're all gonna die. It's inevitable.
Mhm.
So
Heard it
resilience
from
is in a
Dr.
way
Drew.
also, let's have life, but let's live life fully. Let's
yeah,
live life fully in honesty, in integrity, in gratitude, in rhapsody, in rapture, in beauty. Let's live this
love.
amazing gift life. And then when it's time to pop the clocks, it's time to go. Instead of always mourning and complaining and not resolving what is it is incredible. There are still people around the world, ignorant, arrogant people, who do not really understand they themselves have also been traumatized and hurt, and they are all going through suffering and pain. All races, all ethnicity go through it, and their resilience has been tested. Then the resilience becomes a testing tube of some sort. So you little two-legged one, human, you out there, let's do a test with you. Let's see how resilient you really are. Let's see how tough you are. Let's see if you have this toughness you talk about all the
Kaya,
time.
can you talk about pleasures that you see? Like, what are some tidbits you could give the listener? Like you said, to find pleasure again and to distinguish that, like people are pleasure seeking to escape this pain. Like Dr. Drew says, everyone has pain and suffering. Usually people have addictions because they don't have another form of pleasure where they can get away from their pain, right? So we don't want pleasure seeking in terms of that which harms them as well, like addictions. But what kind
Mhm.
of pleasure seeking do you think that when you say that?
For,
When,
for,
please,
for me,
ladies first.
thank you. For me, what the biggest thing has been for me in that rewiring and coming back to has been self-love and self-care, in the way of I really enjoy, and I don't feel enough people do it, Like when it is self massage with oils and really just being present with the body of and saying I love you. I think the words I love you, a lot of people say, oh, you say it all the time, but we don't say it enough. I think just rewiring of saying I love you, I love you, I love you while massaging your body with oils when you get out of the bath or the shower every day, taking that time of self-care in that way. I have so much pleasure in just like having a new tea that I drink sometimes. Of course, we can get to, I'm not going to get into the orgasms and stuff because that, but orgasmic pleasure, like being able to please yourself. I think when you can come to a place where you're like, I can make myself happy right now, that that is power
I think
without
a lot
having
of
to have.
cultures really like they have certain rituals around things like you're talking about, like mindful eating with savory food and just really that pleasure of life in a sacred way. Hey,
Yeah,
so
chocolate, like dark chocolate is like pleasure, is so much pleasure for me. When I intermittent fast during the day and then get to eat, I'm like, oh, this is amazing because I'm not always giving in to what in this society we have access to. I think once we come into a place of more awareness, um, we can take pleasure in smaller things instead of this whole like I'm only going to be happy unless I'm famous or something. And just like I said, like cleaning an apartment, cleaning, in a motel, finding that like I can sing for 4 hours by myself. Just those little pieces are what's important, and the accessibility of those little things, like to be able to music. Oh, how could I not say music is the biggest piece for pleasure when you want to rewire. And I think we forget that in this time we have access to music any time of the day. We can even use our body, but the fact that we can turn something on and or we can use our voice to sing, that rewires us instantly.
so instant gratification culture is a big, I think, hindrance
Oh,
because sometimes we need long-term gratification to think of long-term solutions that the world needs too. So how does one not have too much compulsive behavior go towards pleasure? Where how is it a balance? Anyone could eat too much chocolate or have too much sex, right? And it
mhm.
is as an escapism from the world itself. So I think that there's when it
Balance.
comes from a wound, from pain of sourcing something to completely escape from that pain, then it becomes a challenge where that pain needs to actually be gone into and looked at and felt and expressed and rewired.
Definitely. It's the balance, right? And like you said, we're not always going to have happiness. We're not always going to have moments of pleasure, but we have to be aware that they're out there no matter what we're going through, that there is that place of pleasure that we can attain again. But yeah, the awareness of balance is everything too. Like you can't eat too much chocolate, you can't have too much sex. People do these things all the time, and that's where we're at in the world.
So if
We
someone's
get
stuck in a domestic violence situation at home and maybe they don't have the resilience and the strength yet to leave, but they're consuming chocolate because it helps their dopamine in a
yeah,
time of crisis that they need. And I think that we need to talk about, though, lived realities for people where the way that I have come to see it is I won't disassociate if the world in front of me is enjoyable where my consciousness wants to experience it. So what do I need to do and how can I create a world around me that isn't that kind of stress? Where it's positive, supportive, healthy people in my inner circle, where my career doesn't have toxic stress where I need to escape from it, or I don't overbook myself where it's too much for me. So it's up to me to paint that world. And that's a privilege, though. Not everyone has that privilege. Some people, due to their economic scarcity and realities, maybe they live with 6 people and they don't have a say over some people that come by and they have to experience that. So I do have
mhm,
a privilege where I can paint my life in front of me, where then I don't need to disassociate. But I do think that a lot of people can change their circumstance, even in the most dire situations. I do believe that we can try to create a world where we want to be present for it, and we can articulate that, and we can ask others to do the same, so that we're in a shared reality that is actually more enjoyable to be present with, rather than needing to be escaping and avoiding. And then that's where so many people are disassociated, whether they like to admit it or not. Just like Dr. Drew said, everyone has trauma, whether they like to admit it or not. Most people are disassociating on some level at some points during the day in their lives, whether that's binge watching TV at the end of a work day, or even disassociating during work and just getting through it, or shut down. Shut down is still disassociating. Whether you're going up or you're going in, both are not being present. And I think that we need to get real with our core values that we want to shape our future world.
Yeah, and I think I also want to say, because I do just have to say, with resilience, I keep thinking about what's happening in Gaza and Palestine. And I know that there is atrocities and genocide. It's been going on forever. But I think we also have to talk about the resilience of our ability to also help others too. Because again, like we are not always able to, of course, to give ourselves everything that we need to be resilient. And that's where there is this knowing that we need each other. We are beings that need other beings, right? And that we do need help sometimes. We do need someone to come in and help us become more resilient. We cannot think that it's all in ourselves all the time, because it's not. And yeah, I think that's just really important too, that we realize that there's resilience in our ability to be able to also provide love and support for others during hard times.
Turn toward each other.
Yeah.
And not
Yeah.
just during the crisis, because I know some communities up here are great at turning towards each other during the crisis, and then they go back to their little pods and their little familial resentments, or they don't associate with each other anymore because the crisis is over. But no, to always be turning towards one another.
Yeah.
Definitely, that's the thing. Once one realizes that one's own life is actually created by oneself in one way or another, although there are many factors which make one start differently than another, but still it is this creative possibility, innate creative possibility, ability one has in order to create and understand. When you ask somebody what is the greatest thing, a greatest possession, or greatest whatever in your life, they will say all sorts of things, but very few would say the greatest gift and the greatest treasure is being alive. One's own life is the greatest treasure, the greatest gift ever. Thus, living life, one decides in one way or another. Of course, there are lots of people who've been traumatized, not just personally, but also intergenerationally, transgenerationally. But still, once one starts working on oneself and becoming mindful, becoming aware, and starting feeling and opening up and becoming vulnerable to oneself, to life itself, passing by the alley or in the nature, a long tree alley, real one, and then hearing the birds, listening to the birds, imitating the birds, feeling the birds,
Okay, I
then
love that
smelling the flowers.
the birds, Dr. Drew, I love that you say that, because I recently just heard about it only takes 1 second out of a person's day that can impact their resilience throughout the day. And it's hearing birds chirping.
Yeah.
No,
Sound.
and it not even just, you can even hear audio of it. And
Yeah.
hearing birds chirping, it creates a resilience factor for the whole day.
Yeah.
Definitely so, definitely. So bird, they are chirping in the morning, and not just talking to herself, talking to other birds, talking to the nature, and talking to a two-legged one like a human, if he or she is willing to hear. Because nature all the time talks to us. So walk in the nature, bathing in the nature, as the Japanese do, or walk in the nature, spending time in the nature.
Not always logical, right? So it can create chemicals. We hear it in our ear and it hits it in the drum, and it's not logical. We don't have to know scientifically what happens. We don't have to
Of course
logically
not.
know what creates wellness. We can feel it, and we can become attuned to ourselves to know who we are. Like you said, a person to come to know who they are, come to know their wellness. I think one of the key points is there's a level of resilience isn't the external bark that is created or the scar tissue that's created. And I think that a lot of times people's healing journey, and I know right now inner child healing is very popular because it helps actually to take that bark off or to take some of that callus off. It is not to be calloused and shut down in the world. That is not being healed. That is not being resilient. There's a difference. And I think it's really key to note this, and that as that bark comes off, or as that kind of defense mechanism that the self created softens, that being soft and attuned and open in the world is very important for healthy people. And to be able to be that with one another because each other is safe is very important. And to create an understanding of oneself, but also one's boundaries in order to be able to stay open. As we want to be open and resilient, a strong back and open front, like Brene Brown says, keep your heart open, but have that strong back. And so what do you need to have that strong back? What do you need to say no to in your life around you in order to maintain that open heart, to maintain that openness? So you can say, I feel this. This is who I am. That's a more healthy and attuned nervous system. And resilience, it's really important to note, is the capacity to know that if I need to harden in a moment, I will, but I don't want to stay hardened all the time. One of my key healing moments was for me to heal through my complex PTSD was to say, okay, I can trust myself. I know for a fact that I will do whatever I need to, no matter what I'm faced with. So I don't need to stay tough. I don't need to stay strong and armored. And so that softening is a lot more healthy, that minimizes the hypervigilance. A lot of the toxic stress that leads to heart disease, negative health outcomes, is due to hypervigilance from unhealed trauma. And so to actually soften and reset the autonomic nervous system, to allow it to be at a homeostasis or a resting point, or in my song Landing Pad, I called it landing pad. I had to find my landing pad midway through my life, because even from utero, I didn't have it. I had a overly attuned, hypervigilant mother that created stress in me as a growing fetus. So I never had a landing pad until I started to create that journey.
Definitely what you're saying is true.
Okay.
Can I just add too that dancing is really important as a resilient tool, I think, to just be able to come into dancing, moving.
Definitely moving
Yeah.
the body, moving the mind, moving the brain, moving the soul, moving the spirit, movement, and then still, then
Yeah, and then
movement again, then
Yeah.
stillness.
Yeah. Dance has been my biggest place of pleasure my whole life.
We can look at nature again as an example of that, because non-oxygenated, non-moving bodies of water, they overgrow with bacteria.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. They become stale and putrid, cause all sorts of havoc.
Please tell the listeners where they can find your written works on your social media.
They can find me on LinkedIn under Dr. Andrew Macklin Pagan, MD, PhD.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for your time. Thank you so much for coming on. I look forward to hearing from you again on another theme that we can talk about and reflect on. Thank you, Kaja. Thank you for your beautiful wisdom that you always share as well.
Thank you, Kaja.
Thank you, Dr. Drew from Peru.
Thank you. Have a
And
good
Aurora,
afternoon.
thank you.
Slancha and cheers.